Good evening. I'm Chris Matties out in Los Angeles. Roy Moore says he's not going anywhere. The Republican Alabama Senate candidate responded to yesterday's bombshell Washington Post story, quoting a woman saying he inappropriately touched her when she was a 14-year-old girl in 1979. He called the charge completely false and misleading. Those are his words. Let's listen.
I don't know Ms. Corpman from anybody. I've never talked to her, never had any contact with her. Allegations of sexual misconduct with her are completely false. I believe they're politically motivated. I believe they're brought only to stop a very successful campaign, and that's what they're doing. I don't remember ever dating any girl without the permission of her mother.
Well, the White House issued a cautious statement earlier today. Here was Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Like most Americans, the president believes that we cannot allow a mere allegation, in this case one from many years ago, to destroy a person's life. However, the president also believes that if these allegations are true, Judge Moore will do the right thing and step aside.
Well, some Republicans went much further, calling for Moore to step away right now. Mitt Romney tweeted, "Innocent until proven guilty is for criminal convictions, not elections. I believe Lee Corfman. Her account is too serious to ignore. Moore is unfit for office and should step aside." Well, late today, two U.S. Senators, Mike Lee of Utah, also of Utah, and Steve Daines of Montana, announced they were pulling their endorsements of Moore. And the Senate Republican campaign arm severed financial ties with the Moore campaign. Then there were the bizarre reactions from Moore's supporters. According to the religious news service, Jerry Falwell Jr. said, "It comes down to a question, who is more credible in the eyes of the voters, the candidate or the accuser?" He added, "And I believe the judge," that's Moore, "is telling the truth." In Alabama, the state auditor, Jim Ziegler, reached back to the Bible to defend Moore. He said, "Mary was a teenager and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus. There's just nothing immoral or illegal here, maybe just a little bit of unusual." Interesting reading of the Bible there. Anyway, today he told NBC News, quote, "That is taken out of context. My point was, given the allegations that Roy Moore denies, they're trying to paint the dirty old man syndrome, which doesn't exist. There's been a long history of romances and marriages with teenage girls. Just an example. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. She was a teenager. They finally got married when she was 20. Well, State Representative Ed Henry suggested women accusers should be prosecuted if they believe this man is predatory. They are guilty of allowing him to exist for 40 years. I think someone should prosecute and go after them. You can't be a victim 40 years later, in my opinion. I'm not buying it. It's too easy for someone to make these accusations." Well, Trump's Alabama campaign co-chair also cast doubt on the Washington Post story. Let's listen.
I do not believe the women. And I don't know exactly, because I saw the same thing, same accusations made when President Trump was running. I don't like to see it. I think it's false. But one way to get down to it is just to require them to take a polygraph test.
Well, to make sense of all this, if you can, I'm joined by the assistant managing editor for politics at the Los Angeles Times, Christina Bellantoni, columnist for the Birmingham News, John Archibald, and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio. Boy, this is a sticky wicket to say, as the Brits would say. What a strange story this is. Christina, it just seems to me, seeing that this is a political show, and it's not Access Hollywood or something like that, that what we're seeing here is people going to their corners. And they're just, no matter what the facts are, no matter how yucky the whole thing is, you just go to your side, you take your side, and you play defense.
Right. And you have to keep in mind that a lot of the establishment Republicans that are distancing themselves from Moore right now didn't want him in the race to begin with, right? They backed the guy who was
So why are they for him now? There is a reason.
Well, because he won the election, and they would like to make sure that their numbers stay the same in the Senate. In the end, this comes down to politics. But what's really interesting...
In other words, it's too late to get somebody else in there. The ballot's been printed. That's
right. But look at Hollywood. I mean, there is a film that had Kevin Spacey in it as a supporting actor that they have completely recast Christopher Plummer in because of everything, the accusations that have been coming out. They even
jumped the character's age by 20 or 30 years.
A lot of money.
Just to adjust to situations like this.
So the entertainment industry is seeing a widespread phenomenon right now and actually taking action to change that. Now, what's going to happen in politics? Roy Moore could still very much win this election. It's also far away, and a lot can happen, whether that be more allegations, whether he decides he's going to talk about this further, whether he does step aside, as some people are urging him to do. I mean, the bottom line is he says she's not true. He doesn't even know her. Yeah. That's a hard thing to argue against. You can't, you know, give somebody a polygraph when this is the type of accusation that's being leveled. It's a criminal charge in Alabama at the time that this happened, if it is true.
Well, John Archibald, where are we at on this? Is there any talk of a polygraph for the Senate nominee? Is there any talk of the woman accuser to come forward and really go on television and make her case more dramatically throughout this rest of this campaign? It's about 30-some days left for her to speak.
Yeah, there are people calling for it, and of course we'd all love to see that happen, but there is a lot of effort to discredit without really going through steps to know whether it's right or not. I mean, the supporters of Roy Moore are doing backflips to try to discredit this. You know,
I'm watching this, Susan. First of all, this guy, I don't even know. I hate talking religion on television about it for a political show, but I don't mind it. There was a virgin birth of Jesus. That's the Christmas story. This idea that they were having sex doesn't square with certainly the Christmas story of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph that I grew up with. I don't know why these people are reaching so desperately for these parallels. And then Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. I mean, Lauren Bacall was about 19 or 20, going on 30 perhaps at the time. She was a grown-up person. I mean, I watched those movies. She wasn't some 14-year-old. It's an absurd comparison. They're reaching really hard here.
They are, and you're right. It is desperate. This is... right now, there's a message out there, either elect a child molester or Democrat, and some Republicans in Alabama are saying, I'd rather elect a child molester. Well, it's time for the Republicans to stand up and say no to this. And we've seen 2 senators take away their endorsement. We've seen that the Senate funding for the Republican Senate Committee has taken away the funding. These are all good steps, and they must continue. These women put their name out there, and it is so difficult for them in their communities. These aren't famous women who can go and leave it, you know, go hide away for a couple of weeks and lay low if they want to. They have to go to the supermarket. Their children have to go to school. This was extremely difficult. So yes, I believe them because they have a lot more on the line, and that these accusations or calling for polygraphs, I'd rather see Moore take a polygraph. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't pass it. But he's been a pariah all along for a lot of Republicans. Let's not forget when he went to Washington just a couple of weeks ago, he wouldn't take questions, and a lot of people stayed very far away from him. He really has not been active, and John can talk more about this, but he hasn't been active on the campaign trail, and I don't expect to see him out there that much now. So this interview and a few interviews won't clear up this problem, and Republicans have to continue to stand up against him.
John Archibald, there's not going to be any kind of criminal case or even civil case. This isn't going to go before a tribunal of any official nature. It does seem to be something that's going to be tried in the press. It just seems that way. What do you make of that? How do you like that?
That's true. And, you know, we're not going to find out between now and Election Day the truth of these allegations. Which is why many Republicans have decided that it's just not worth considering. I think what a lot of people don't understand is how much the Mitch McConnell actions, how much the so-called establishment Republican rebuke of Roy Moore only helps Roy Moore, because essentially that's what pushed him over Luther Strange in the primary, and there's so much animosity there that none of that drips down on Alabama. He's not going anywhere.
Well, what does the phrase Washington Post mean politically down there in Alabama? When a voter hears the phrase Washington Post, honestly, what do they hear?
Well, they hear fake news, which is hurts the soul of an old newspaper guy, but that's the way it is. I mean, there's very little trust there right now among those people who support Roy Moore.
And yet
Right,
those
well-
people, Chris, just as an FYI, they all believe the New York Times, which they also have a problem with, but when they were accusing Harvey Weinstein, they had no problem believing that and calling for Obama and other Democrats to step away from him.
Right. We don't know really what Alabama voters are believing in their press, but we do know that the strategy is to attack the media in particular, and then go on Fox News and talk about that there. You know, part of the whole system is breaking down here, and if people are only hearing one bit of information, they're never going to be able to make a decision for themselves. And I will say, you know, the LA Times, we've been at the forefront of both in the entertainment industry and here in Sacramento at looking into abuse allegations, misconduct allegations, harassment allegations. These are not stories that are taken lightly. We spend a lot of time reporting them. We are very careful. And that Washington Post story did not read like they put it together real quick. It didn't read like fake
a lot of
news.
sources
Certainly not
there.
lapdogs.
In fact, a lot of it, almost an interrogation of 6 different people interrogating her.
And then those stories, everybody takes them very seriously. And it's really important to be doing this right now. This is a phenomenon we are looking at across all industries.
I know. Well, Roy Moore said he wasn't going anywhere and blamed the attack, as we just heard, on the media or a media conspiracy. Here he goes.
The Washington Post has attacked my foundation. They've attacked my wife, and now they're attacking me personally on a sexual matter. I don't know what's coming next, but I'm sure that in the next 4 weeks, they're going to come out with another article because they've got an agenda, and they're fulfilling their agenda right as we speak.
Well, that attack by the candidate was echoed by Steve Bannon, his supporter. Let's listen to Steve.
The Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post that dropped that dime on Donald Trump is the same Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post that dropped the dime this afternoon on Judge Roy Moore. Now, is that a coincidence? That's what I mean when I say opposition party, right? It's purely part of the apparatus of the Democratic Party.
Well, let me go back to John Archibald. There's a new axis I hadn't heard of before. It's the Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post. It's almost like the World War II kind of axis. Does this ring familiar? Does anybody know what Jeff Bezos' politics are? Or Amazon, which seems to be pretty antiseptic politically, why they would have a left-wing bent? Or just because they're big time, is that it?
I think that is. They're big-time, new age. I think it's a finely crafted phrase that was thought about for a while, and I guarantee you it resonates with some people here.
What do you think about the race? I'm looking at the poll numbers. Let's take a look at them right now. This is a new Alabama poll of likely voters. That's a good poll usually. It means it's been screened. These are people that are probably going to show up. It shows them basically 46 all. Is that what it smells like down there? John? Does it smell 46, 46?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty optimistic for the Democrat. It may be drawing closer, but polls here have not been very accurate. It would be a real surprise still for him to be that close. But, you know, it's a single race election. Turnout has been historically low in these things.
Not now. You think this isn't going to? I would think this would juice the electorate in a lot of ways. I want to get back to Susan. This is going to get. I mean, I just looked at the numbers today. 80-some% of the people in Alabama knew yesterday all about this story. They're all going to know about it. I don't care if you're the least political person on the block. You're going to have heard this story and have an attitude about it.
Yeah, you are, and to go to turnout, one is, I guess the question will be, I know that there's a local race in Montgomery County which can in turn turn out towards the Democrat. Plus, like we saw on Tuesday, either women are going to come out strong or there's going to be a lot of Republicans who are kind of disgusted with what's going on and not come out at all. And that's what we're looking at in a special election. But this is going to be an ugly 30 days. There's no question about it. Yeah. And just to that clip that you showed about Steve Bannon, he's one to talk. Right now, he's representing child molesters and felons, and that's not the party of the Republicans.
Who are those people you're talking about? Who are those people you're talking about?
The child molester is obviously Roy Moore, and a former convicted felon is Michael Grimm up in New York. Yeah. So that's who he's getting behind in his career after the White House. Well, that's not what the Republican Party is.
The Democrats have to be careful here, right? Because we know that national Democrats are Googling Doug Jones's name. He's probably getting more donations, right? They're very invested in this race. They smell blood.
What happens when Tom Steyer supports him and George Soros? That's not going to help.
Exactly. And Alabama voters may not appreciate that type of message. And the other part here is that we are talking about a Senate election where you've got establishment Republicans who are saying, you know, we're not going to back that guy now. We're going to turn our other way. Don't forget what happened a year ago. That helped Donald Trump win the presidency.
You know, I've been thinking for years about this guy, Trump, at least a year, I should say. Freddy Krueger keeps coming back in the next movie. Every time you think he's gone, Freddy Krueger is back. Anyway, thank you, Christina Bellantoni. Not that the president is Freddy Krueger. He's just like that. Anyway, John Archibald, thank you from Birmingham, Alabama, and Susan Del Persia. We're going to have much more on our top story later in the hour, but first, NBC News reports that special counsel Robert Mueller is investigating a secret deal between former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and senior Turkish officials. Flynn was allegedly offered, catch this, millions of dollars to seize one of President Erdogan's opponents here in this country and hand him over to the Turks. This is dirty business if it's true. Plus, Tuesday's election was a morale boost for Democrats and progressives, of course. How do they build on that momentum for 2018? And 2020, we're going to talk to Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, who's been talked about as a potential presidential contender. And the continued fallout from the Roy Moore allegations. Steve Bannon is standing by the Alabama Senate candidate. We heard that. But he's calling for the ouster of another Republican lawmaker, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Finally, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. This is Hardball, where the action is. I'm out here in California on tour for Bobby Kennedy, A Raging Spirit, which is near the very top now of the New York Times bestseller list. And tonight I'll be appearing on Real Time with Bill Maher. I'll be on a special two-person panel with, get this, Michael Moore, Donna Brazile, and Sarah Silverman round out the cast tonight. What a group. Then tomorrow afternoon, I'll be speaking to another sold-out crowd, this time at an event at Scripps College in Claremont, California. What has struck me in just a week of publication of this book is how the story of Bobby Kennedy has touched this country's heart. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hard. We learned this week that in the case of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, Special Counsel Robert Mueller has assembled enough evidence to bring charges against him. Well, now NBC News is reporting new details about Mueller's interest in Flynn's work on behalf of the government of Turkey, specifically his potential involvement in a plan to forcibly remove one of President Erdogan's political opponents from the United States and deliver him forcibly to Turkey. Well, the plan, which the incoming National Security Advisor discussed with Turkey's officials in a meeting during the transition, could represent, quote, a potential quid pro quo in which Flynn would be paid to carry out directives from Ankara, that's the capital of Turkey, secretly while in the White House and on the White House payroll. In exchange, Flynn was offered upwards of $15 million to be paid directly or indirectly if he could complete the deal, according to two sources familiar with that meeting. Well, it's the kind of leverage that Mueller could use to persuade Flynn to become a cooperating witness in the larger Russian investigation. Well, late today, Flynn's lawyers said in a statement, we have intentionally avoided responding to every rumor or allegation raised in the media, but today's news cycle has brought allegations about General Flynn, ranging from kidnapping to bribery, that are so outrageous and prejudicial that we are making an exception to our usual rule. They are false. Joining me now is the author of the report, NBC's Julie Ainsley. Ken Vogel's a reporter with the New York Times, and Bob Shrum, a Democratic strategist. Well, I want to go to Julie on this. Tell us as much as you can about the nature of what we know to be true here about a conversation between Turkish officials and General Flynn about the question of whether he would participate in forcibly getting somebody back to Turkey that was an enemy of Erdogan, the president.
So, of course, Chris, we stand by our reporting. Carol Lee and I very much have been reporting this for a long time, and we have sources that say that Michael Flynn and that Mueller is looking into whether Michael Flynn, in December of 2016, when he was already working for the Trump presidential transition, met at the 21 Club in New York. That's just blocks away from Trump Tower, where he was working on the transition, with Turkish officials, and was offered upwards of $15 million if he could secure the removal of Fethullah Gulen. That, of course, is the elderly Muslim cleric living in the Poconos, who is a political opponent of Turkish President Erdogan. This is something that the Turks had been pleading for a long time. They asked the Obama administration to review this. They dismissed it. And then we know that after Trump came into the administration and after Flynn became his national security advisor, the FBI was asked again to review this case with no new information. So what Mueller is looking for now is whether or not Flynn exploited his position as national security advisor and was influenced by a foreign power in this position. This, of course, could fall under a bribery statute. Without even taking that money, he could be subject to prosecution.
To win a bribery case, I've watched this for years, you have to almost have a tape. Don't you? I mean, you have to show a quid pro quo conversation. If I do this, you will do that. And that has to be basically sealed in a conversation. It can't just be an inference or some assumption made. How would you get something like that in a case like this unless one of the people were wired in real time? Wired.
Well, of course, it's difficult, but we know that Special Counsel Mueller has the ability to subpoena businesses. He could look at the 21 Club, people who met there. He could try to talk to people who were involved in this meeting. We know that he is speaking to witnesses who worked with Flynn and the Flynn Intel Group because he's very interested in his business of lobbying on behalf of Turkey. That, of course, would encompass this. And the grand jury is hearing from more witnesses through the end of next week. This is something he's pushing really hard on, Chris, because he wants to be able to turn Flynn into a cooperating witness because, of course, Flynn gets closer into the Trump administration than someone like Paul Manafort or George Papadopoulos ever would. He actually served as part of this transition and in the White House.
Ken, you know that term in mathematics and physics called asymptotic? Something gets close to close to close. It keeps cutting the distance in half, keeps cutting the distance in half, but it never quite hits. You know, it's a theory of limits. That's what this case is like. It's so teasing because every time we get an account, like this account, which is probably totally true, and you get it, but it never quite satisfies because you never get that point of they were heard saying, if you do this, I'll do that. And this seems to be the pattern in all of Mueller's investigations. It's very teasing, very appetizing, because it seems to get, they're in a meeting, they talked about a certain topic, there was an offer made, and pause, nothing. And then you go, well, I'd like to know a little more here. Go ahead, Ken. That's the pattern.
I mean, I don't think you have to get all the way there. We saw that in the Manafort and the Gates indictments, where there's there are Foreign Agents Registration Act violations, there are alleged tax violations, there are alleged money laundering violations, and what you have here already is the groundwork for a case that's similar to that, for an indictment that's similar to that. Flynn has already acknowledged that he did not properly register his work on behalf of this Dutch company that is Turkish-owned through the Foreign Agents Registration Act. This is another meeting. This meeting in December in New York City, even if there was no money that changed hands, even if there was no contract that was signed, just the fact of that meeting where they're talking about ways to influence U.S. foreign policy, perhaps extra-legally, but nonetheless influence U.S. foreign policy, that should trigger the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and Flynn did not register that work.
Ken, if he didn't perform any service, didn't carry out this request, this professional offer, that would still be a violation of the law, you're saying? Even if just having the conversation.
Yes, because you're meeting with a foreign principal about influencing U.S. foreign policy. Doesn't have to be money change hands. There have been cases where there's been fire registrations without any money changing hands. And my understanding is that this would fit that bill.
Bob, we've known each other a long time. You know what this looks like? It looks like a very impressive prosecutor who is building what might be called leverage on a lot of people. He's got Michael Flynn. If he broke a couple of laws, you can throw the book at the guy. Nobody wants to go to prison, even if it's a technicality for 10, 20 years, which they can do. Threatening the son, nobody wants their son to go to jail because of something they got them into. It looks to me like he is building and building and building with one goal in mind, get the top guy.
Well, probably to get the truth. I mean, but he wants to pressure these folks. There are a whole host of potential felonies that I think Michael Flynn could conceivably face. I don't think we can know what Mueller has until some of these cases go to trial. Even the indictment, if there is an indictment, isn't going to tell us everything. But there's one real clue to this, I think, and that was the president asking James Comey, before he fired him as FBI director, to go easy on Mike Flynn. You know, Donald Trump's not someone famous for his loyalty to anyone but his family.
He's not St. Francis, no.
Anybody else could be thrown under the bus.
So you think he was keeping him at bay?
Well, it logically suggests that Trump is worried that Flynn could put him in a whole world of hurt.
Okay, you're General Flynn, and you've got to worry about what Trump might do to you, or some residue of loyalty to him, which we all not both understand in politics. You have a loyalty to those who have appointed you. But to his son, that doesn't even touch the loyalty factor here. He's got to look out for his family.
Well, his son obviously was involved in all sorts of all parts of his business, and obviously is vulnerable here. And I think he will worry about that. But beyond that, he's got to think about what's going to happen to him, to what's left of his reputation. And my guess is that maybe he's hoping that if things go badly, Trump will give him a pardon.
Yeah, well, why not? Anyway, Joey, you've also been reporting for NBC News that Robert Mueller is also investigating a meeting between Flynn, General Flynn, and this is a strange one. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher of California, I've known Dana a long time. He's a staunch advocate, for whatever reason, for lifting sanctions with Russia. Quote, Mueller's interest in the nature of Flynn and Rohrabacher's discussion marks the first known time a member of Congress could be wrapped into the investigation. In May, the New York Times also reported that an FBI agent told Mr. Rohrabacher in 2012 that Russian spies were trying to recruit him as an agent of influence, someone the Russian government might be able to use to steer Washington policy making. Julia, what is the politics here? It used to be, when I was growing up for thousands of years, that Republicans didn't like Russians. They considered them communists. They particularly didn't like the KGB. They were the bad guys. In the black spy, white spy stories, they were the black guys. They were the black spies, the bad guys. Now, why are they the good guys now? Why would Rohrabacher like Putin?
You know, this relationship has always caused a lot of people to raise eyebrows. I mean, we even had that tape that the Washington Post reported on earlier this year, where Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader on the Senate, when Kevin McCarthy was trying to say that if anyone is being paid by Russia, it's Trump and it's Rohrabacher. I mean, it's very strange that his name has come up and up again. He has also advocated for dropping the Magnitsky Act, which of course sanctions Russians, and he's also advocated for giving protections to Julian Assange. So the fact that his name is coming up in a meeting with Michael Flynn is of course of interest to Robert Mueller, and they are now looking at emails exchanged between the Flynn Intel Group and Rohrabacher's staff. We know that they had a meeting September 20th in D.C., and that at this time, he brought in a number of people from his Flynn Intel Group, the lobbying firm, not from the campaign. But it's hard to separate those two, because at the time, Flynn was also working as an advisor to the campaign. So again, he's running into this place where he's trying to have both ways, being the lobbyist and the advisor.
Well, again, I'll quote Jackie Mason, but there's just blood here all over the place, all over the defendant, and there's Russia all over these people. Russia's can't. I've never in my life heard of so many Russian contacts by the Republican side or any side in American politics, and I think it has to do with lots of rubles looking for a place to go. Anyway, thank you, Joey Ainsley. I think we should follow the money, and I know we are. And, of course, Ken Vogel and Bob Shrum, sir. Thank you all, you guys. Still ahead, the continued fallout from the Roy Moore allegations, and up next, how do Democrats keep the momentum coming out of Tuesday's mess? I mean, these victories are like 1974. We're going to ask Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, a possible 2020 presidential contender. The great mentioner is mentioning him for president. And this is Hardball, where the action is.
Richard Louis with some breaking news for you. The Washington Post is reporting that the body of a U.S. soldier killed in an ambush in Niger last month was found with his arms bound and a wound indicating he may have been executed. Comedian Louis C.K. says recent allegations of his sexual misconduct are true. He apologized to the women involved for using his power as a celebrity irresponsibly. FX Networks announced today it is severing all ties with the comedian. And bundle up. The first major Arctic blast of the season is producing bone-chilling temperatures across the Midwest and Northeast. For now, back to Hardball.
Today, Virginians have answered and have spoken. Virginia has told us to end the divisiveness, that we will not condone hatred and bigotry, and to end the politics that have torn this country apart.
Tonight, we declare the days of division are over. We will move forward together.
Welcome back to Hardball. Tuesday's Democratic victories from Maine to Montana provided a much-needed boost, a big morale boost for a party which many argue has lost its way since last year's election. But the high from Tuesday's victory is already waning, or waning, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Democrats have yet to deal with two fundamental structural problems: a lack of leadership nationally and a unified message. With 2020 only 3 years away and President Trump is starkly unpopular, a slew of potential Democratic contenders has popped up across the country, from Joe Biden to Elizabeth Warren and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, who just last week decided to pass on a run for governor of California. The mayor, who was reelected last March in a massive landslide, recently launched a new national initiative to help boost infrastructure across the country. Mayor Eric Garcetti joined. Well, certainly, I'm with you on this.
Yes.
And I don't even like the word infrastructure. I want rapid rail. I want everything. I want to reunite a polarized country. Tell us your dream.
Well,
if you were the president.
We launched Accelerator for America this week in South Bend, Indiana, and I think that mayors know how to get things done.
He's a good mayor.
He's a great mayor. Mayor Pete Buttigieg out there. We had mayors from Dayton, from Columbia, South Carolina, from Nashville, and we know that right now, while Washington is so broken, it's up to us to show people how you can actually create jobs, fix this country, and build our future. And I think people are frustrated, not just with the White House, but the inaction.
Why don't the leaders, I'm watching Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they just wait for the president to propose a tax bill, and then they sort of whine about it. They're not proposing stuff like rebuilding the country.
Right.
Why don't they do it?
And the money that was supposed to be brought back to this country.
Well, why don't they do it?
Well, I think that right now they're so busy playing defense. Schumer does have a plan. I've met with him. It's a $1 trillion plan that would equal what the president has talked about. But I think that what we forget is the same night a year ago that Trump was elected president, cities passed $230 billion of infrastructure. That's almost a quarter of the $1 trillion they're talking about. So while we need Washington to step up, we're not powerless where we live, in the states where we are, the local communities we are, to get that job done. And that's what we're doing here in LA. We passed the largest transportation infrastructure package in U.S. history ×2, $120 billion, 15 rapid transit lines, 750,000 jobs for the next 40 years in this town. Those are middle-class jobs.
Jobs. How do you get the Democrats to get the white working class back to the party?
Start speaking English again. Start just speaking normal, plain, straightforward English to people about jobs, about infrastructure, and stop being obsessed about a Democratic agenda. Start getting into an agenda for the American people again. I think people don't wake up asking who's in charge of the Democratic Party, who's running our state party. They don't care about those internecine battles. They want to see people who are talking to them about their education, about their debt, and about their home, about their health care, those things where people live, and we got to go back to that. We're the party of the underdog.
Are you running?
I'm not a candidate for president. I'm a mayor of a great city.
Would you like to be president of the United States?
Well, I'm focused on 2018 right now and making sure that we can flip the House, protect what we have, and get a party in power that isn't defining itself by what it takes away, but what it gives.
I think you're smiling. And by the way, I think you're running. And by the way, it's your decision, not mine, obviously. Is there anybody better than you to be the Democratic nominee in 2020? Is there anybody out there you can think of that's better than anybody better than you?
I never assume I'm the best person.
Who's better than you?
Well, Joe Biden is a dear friend of mine. I mean, he's somebody I'd look forward to.
You're right. You're going for running mate. Anyway, thank you, LA Mayor. I agree.
Great to have you back in LA.
I think you'll be a great candidate. I hope you run. Up next, the political damage from the Roy Moore bombshell. Other Republicans may be distancing themselves, wouldn't you, from the Alabama Senate candidate? But Steve Bannon has made it clear he's standing by his man. You're watching Hardball. Look at the guy. Right? He's got his jobber on, too. That's to show he's a regular guy. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. As we mentioned, while many Republicans are in damage control over allegations against Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, Steve Bannon standing by his man. Bannon backed Moore in his primary fight against Luther Strange, even campaigning on his behalf. Well, the former White House chief strategist has also accused Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of trying to destroy Moore. And in an interview with the New York Times, Bannon launched yet another attack on McConnell. Let's listen.
The Senate and Mitch McConnell have been the
the most outrageous in their lack of support of President Trump's agenda.
So that's his greatest offense, is not supporting the president enough.
The greatest offense is not supporting the president enough as of now. I think he showed his contempt for the grassroots movement. I think he showed his contempt for the Trump movement in those actions. And so, yes, Mitch McConnell has to go.
Do you think Mitch McConnell will be majority leader at this time next year?
I absolutely do not think he will be majority leader.
Let's bring in the Hardball Roundtable. Eliza Collins is Capitol Hill reporter for USA Today. Clarence Page is columnist for the Chicago Tribune. And Ginger Gibson is political correspondent for Reuters. It's a great team. Why don't you all begin to assess, in the order of naming you, about how the Republicans get out of these Chinese handcuffs? I mean, it seems to me the more they support this guy, and they already pretty much have done it, they're stuck with him. But if he wins, they've got to explain him through history and the indiscretions, you might call them if you're his best friend, of the past. And if they lose with him, they don't. If he gets blown out of the race, the Democrat wins. Eliza, you first.
They're in Chinese handcuffs. I think that's the best way to say it. They have a very narrow majority in the Senate. They could really use another Republican to help get their agenda, such as tax reform, through. That being said, do they really want their Republican to be someone who is accused of dating a teenager and not quite denying it? I mean, he's denied it, but he's used things like "I can't remember," and generally, we've seen Republicans, and just tonight we saw 2 senators unendorse him, which I think is showing sort of where they're feeling.
You know, Clarence, you and I are of a similar past. We've been through the same life about the same time. I have never heard a guy say, I've never dated somebody without asking permission of their parents. Never dated anybody. You don't meet the parents first. It's the craziest thing I heard. Can I meet your parents before I go out with you? Even ask you out for a date? Can we go to the movie? Oh, got to ask your parents before I take you to the movies. And he's talking about a 14-year-old. What would you say to the parents to a 14-year-old when you're 32? I mean, it's cockamamie. The defense is cockamamie.
Hard to imagine. One of my colleagues said that he didn't touch a 14-year-old girl even when he was 14 himself. And I think this is such a shocking story in that regard. But, Chris, you know, we've been around long enough to have seen what happened like after the Lewinsky scandal. It's like I think a lot of people in the Republican base feel like, well, they let Bill Clinton get away with it, and this is no worse than that, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I mean, people are really justifying, rationalizing as much as they can in order to keep party unity. But the Chinese handcuffs comparison is not a bad one, because it's certainly appropriate.
Ginger, I just wonder about the insanity. I mean, this is all tricky business for somebody who just covers politics, but the difference between Lauren Bacall and a 14-year-old, I'm sorry, I've seen all the movies. I mean, I don't get the Lauren Bacall reference to a 14-year-old. I don't even understand what we're talking about here when people make these defenseless defenses.
And Humphrey Bogart wasn't running for the U.S. Senate in Alabama. Right. Republicans are in a tough spot. I've heard some suggest that Mitch McConnell may be better off with a Democrat from Alabama, knowing that the next time that seat was up, it would be a win in their column. Yeah. I think their biggest liability is going to be all the tape recorders that would be in front of Roy Moore for his duration of time in the Senate. Reporters would be flocking to him to get his comments on nearly everything, and that's a liability. Because every time he gives a quote that ends up in a story, it's a reminder, not just to the voters of Alabama, but the voters across the country, that this guy managed to get elected if he wins and would be in the United States Senate.
Well thought through. I think you're right. They could at least get rid of him if they didn't have him there. They get somebody else in there. Anyway, Roy Moore was championed, however, by Steve Bannon. Here's some of the candidates Bannon has backed, by the way, or reported to have encouraged to run. It's hell of a list. Let's watch.
This contraceptive thing, my gosh, it's such inexpensive. You know, back in my days, they used bare aspirin for contraceptives. The gals put it between their knees, and it wasn't that costly.
John McCain has fallen down on the job. He's gotten weak. He's gotten old.
You brought up his age. That's a tough attack.
Well, I mean, I'm a physician. I see the physiological changes that happen in normal aging in patients again and again and again over the last 20, 25 years.
Do you think that homosexuality or homosexual conduct should be illegal today? That's a yes or no question.
Homosexual conduct should be illegal. Yes.
Congressman Michael Grimm does not want to talk about some of the allegations concerning his campaign finances. We wanted to get him on camera on that, but he, as you saw, refused to talk about that. Back to you.
Why? Let me be clear to you. You have to do that to me again. I'll tell you this. No. You're not mad. You're not mad.
Eliza, that's the murderer's row that has been cooked up by Steve Bannon. I mean, these characters, Michael Grimm threatening to break up like a boy, and we're going to outlaw being gay, and all this stuff. It's just one after another. These are strange candidates, including the one that beat Strange.
And it's quite a list, and it's a list that the Republican Party has to figure out how to deal with. I mean, Kelly Ward, who is the one who said that Senator McCain is too old, she right now is the leading person because Jeff Flake dropped out of the Arizona Senate race. But we saw Flake when he pulled out, we saw immediately Republicans saying the only good news here is that a more mainstream candidate can get in. They call her conspiracy theorist Kelly. And so Republicans are going to have to figure out what is better, to have a Republican in the seat or to have one of these people on Bannon's list.
What a choice.
Yeah.
What a choice.
Yeah,
we'll be right back, Clarence. I've got to get back with you in a minute. The round table sticking with us. And up next, these three, starting with you, Clarence, will give me scoops for the weekend. This is Hardball, where the action is. President Trump is gearing up for a series of meetings later today at the OPEC summit in Vietnam. World leaders kicked off the summit by taking part in a traditional family photo. There it is, during which President Trump was seen sharing small talk with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, the exchange comes amid word from the White House that there will be no formal meeting between the two leaders due to scheduling conflicts on both sides. Do you believe that? Despite that, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters that they're going to be in the same place. So are they going to bump into each other and say hello? Certainly that is possible and likely. How coy. We'll be right back. We're back with a Hardball Roundtable. Clarence, you're first. Tell me something I don't know.
Well, Chris, the TSA has replaced their acting administrator after the recent test of security enabled 80% of the testers to slip through the metal detectors, and also you might want to think about taking Greyhound back to Washington.
It's nice to know if you wait in line to do something, it doesn't make any difference. Ginger.
Right.
Reuters Ipsos poll this past week found that 79% of Americans think that tax reform should help the middle class as over corporate tax rates cuts. However, only 8% of Americans think that tax reform actually will help the middle class, and most believe that it will help the wealthy.
They're smart. Thank you, Eliza.
Back to Alabama, some conservative lawmakers, while they haven't publicly spoken about how distancing themselves from more, they're talking about possible write-ins that are conservative enough not to split the ticket. And they're talking about Jeff Sessions, who is currently the Attorney General, and Mo Brooks, the congressman from Alabama.
Wow, I don't know. It's going to be very tricky because the ballots have been printed. Anyway, Eliza Collins, Clarence Page, Ginger Gibson. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. You're watching Hardball. Trump Watch, Friday, November 10th, 2017. This has been a nasty week for the Trump team. First, the punch in the gut from the voters on Tuesday. In the first big electoral test since the victory last November, voters yelled a loud no to the man in the White House. The blast came especially strong from the suburbs, which usually decide elections in this country. The second wob came with the charge that U.S. Senate candidate Roy Moore became involved with a 14-year-old back in his early 30s. Well, the reaction from fellow Republicans was swift and negative. We have, let's remind ourselves, been here before, however, believing that Donald Trump has gotten himself into trouble so deep he'd be unable to climb out of it. What is different this time is that voters are now calling the president to account. They sided with him last year when the issue was the attitude and performance of the political establishment. The issue now is the personality and performance of Donald Trump himself. If he continues to perform as he has the last year, if nothing changes in his conduct, it's hard to see how the voters' verdict will be any more positive a year from now when the country votes to pick a new Congress. And that's Hardball for now. Thanks for being with us. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.